Good evening. It's Tuesday night, and we are here at the Education Channel with our program, Career Assistance Program. So I'm very happy to welcome all of you. This is your host, Attorney Amihan April Alcazar.
All right. We're going to go ahead and start. So excited to be with all of you today. Thank you for joining us for a discussion on growing peer mentorship engagement for persistence. Really excited to get all of your perspectives in a virtual room here, and really excited to have our guests returning to share a second year of data and lessons with us. And so let's jump right into that. Before we do, just some best practices. Make sure you can, if you'd like to, make sure you're on mute. Make sure that you go to your name in the participant list and put your institution so that folks know what institution you're from and can chat with you directly and connect with you. Adjust your video layout to speaker view as well. Always a good tip. So here's a quick agenda for us. We're going to dive into our backgrounds. Everyone has an idea of where this research is coming from. Then we're going to jump into a case study from UC Riverside, looking at 2 years of data. And then we are lucky enough to have a student perspective, which is rare and amazing. And so we will have a mentor from Riverside's program, giving her perspective throughout. And also throughout, please give us some questions. We have some amazing people standing by to answer those questions. In addition to my amazing panel, we have folks who are in the weeds helping to run and study these programs. So your questions will be answered. Please answer them throughout, and we'll have some time to verbally answer them as well. And you can just ask those in the chat. Great. So with that, thought you could use another picture of me, I guess. My name is Joe Mickey. I know a lot of you. I've worked with many of you over the years. I've been in higher ed and higher ed adjacent for the last 16 years, trying to solve the challenge of trying to help universities do more with less and track the efficacy of programs. What attracted me to an amazing group of folks who were studying mentorship a few years ago is I never knew if the work I was doing was trickling down to students. So it was so refreshing and rare to come across a group who had run mentorship programs like many of you and other programs as well. And they never knew, if we were reaching the right people. They never knew if mentors and mentees were talking, and scale was always a challenge. So that became our life's work, is try to solve for those two things, scalability and trackability of mentorship. So we'll get into how we do that and why we do that as just a setup to the research that we'll be covering today. But let's get into the real reason why you're here. Before I introduce our panel, we also have two other folks who help run this program from Mentor Collective. Rory Quinones and Chrissy Thomas, they are the folks interacting with students through training, through matching, through recruitment of UC Riverside's mentorship program. And they will stand by to answer any of the questions that you put into the chat, like your ratios, do you pay mentors, and how do you do assessment? They are here to help answer all of that. Lisa Desjardins will also help answer that. She helps run this program at UC Riverside and helping me to go through this data. He's done this a few times recently at conferences, and you've probably seen him, Dr. Tom Stixton. So I will let Tom say hello.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Dr. Tom Stixton from the Assistant Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education at UC Riverside. With me as well is also Lisa Desjardins from my offices, who doesn't have much of a voice this morning. And so she's going to be in the chat answering questions. So we'll help preserve her vocal cords there. And then also, of course, we need to introduce our amazing student.
Karina, would you like to say hello?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Karina Patel. I'm a first-generation college student who is majoring in neuroscience. Similar to every human being, I'm a multifaceted person. I'm a student, mentor, peer, friend, and a proud daughter to immigrant parents. My family lineage is from India. However, my mom was born and raised in South Africa, and she lived a portion of her life through the apartheid. Whereas my dad was born in Rhodesia, which is present-day Zimbabwe, and fought in the Rhodesian Bush War as a sergeant. Then there's me, an American-born confused Indian. I like to recognize where I have come from because it's a reminder that when given an opportunity, someone can achieve the heights. Today, I'm here to talk to you about my experience of being a mentor as I earned my first degree.
Amazing introduction. Thank you so much, Karina. And thank you for bringing your whole self and all the perspectives that you just listed. So excited and so lucky to have you join us today. Can you tell us just a little bit on what attracted you to being a mentor and why you wanted to sign up to help another student?
Yes, of course. So when I first got to UC Riverside, like I previously mentioned, I am a first generation student. So I had a whole bunch of simple questions, but I didn't know who to ask because you feel like a small fish in a big pond. And I didn't have anyone that I was close to. My professors, I didn't get to build a relationship with them yet. So I had no one to ask. And so I spent a considerable amount of time trying to figure out the different resources on campus. And it was overwhelming because just for one small question, I had to put my whole soul into it, trying to find who can help me. So that kind of inspired me to be a mentor, because with that knowledge, I took that and I was like, I would like to help my fellow peers with their experience here at UC Riverside, because now they can just come to me and they're like, Karina, where do I go? I was like, oh, this office, this office, this office. And if that doesn't help, come back and I can help you and we can figure it out together.
This is an amazing perspective and an excellent way, the perfect way to start our conversation today. And so I think what Karina was just highlighting is that we all believe in the power of a degree. We wouldn't be working in this atmosphere if we didn't. But college doesn't always work for everyone. You'll see the disparity gaps that we're all familiar with, socioeconomic status. Only 14% graduate within 8 years of graduating high school. So these are the things that we want to frame our conversation with today, and the lens that we want to look at mentorship through. Thank you for bringing that perspective, Karina. We're going to come back and get a little bit more into the relationships that you just described and passing on the knowledge that you had to figure out on your own. So thank you for being the voice you wish that you had as you were figuring everything out. Great. So jumping right in, for those of you who've either ran a mentor program or are thinking about running a mentor program, here's some things to think about or that you might be familiar with. There are a lot of moving parts. There needs to be you or someone on your team who is running the program. You need to recruit mentors like Karina, or if it's a career program, alumni. You need to give them some sort of training without it being overly scripted, so it's a barrier to them being a mentor. Mentorship is not the same as advising or tutoring. It is a little different. It is being vulnerable. It is being exactly what Karina just mentioned, the voice that you wish you had at the right time. Matching. We think this is the most difficult thing to do, but also the most important. I want to get into Karina's relationship in a little bit, what makes a good match, but it's more than just fields of study. It's more than just what mentor do I have available. It's shared identities, shared challenges. And then you usually need some sort of software to house curriculum for a mentorship program. This shouldn't be overly scripted, but there should be things for them to talk about so they don't run out of things to talk about. And then tracking. For all of us who have ran programs, we know this is incredibly difficult. Usually you pair people up, they go off and talk, and you're not sure what they're talking about or if they're actually talking. And if a mentee says to a mentor, I don't have food, or I'm thinking about dropping out, does that make it to an advisor? Does that make it to the food pantry? And then assessment. Without that tracking, you can't really do assessment to say this is moving the needle on retention or sense of belonging, all of the things that we care about. We're lucky enough to have someone here today who's very assessment-minded, and Dr. Tom Stixton, who will be sharing longitudinal retention data. We can actually get into that data by number of conversations, which isn't something you see a lot of when you look at assessment for these types of programs. And then budget. We're all facing difficult times right now. How do we justify spending money on one more program? How do we calculate return on investment of a mentor program? And how do we make sure this is something sustainable? Because mentorship is not a quick fix. So these are all the things that you have to think about when you're thinking about mentorship. And that's what we'll be covering today through the lens of peer mentorship. But if you're looking at a career program or faculty program, no worries, we'll sprinkle in some of those insights as there's a lot of overlap in what needs to happen to run a program as well. And I want to mention that while all that's happening and students are talking about finances and family, again, those things aren't usually tracked. So the 6 things that we want to think about when we look at Tom's data today are program design, recruitment, training, matching, actually engaging people, and then assessment. These are the things that should go into a program. And so Mentor Collective, just as a quick introduction to who we are, we're an organization that helps universities to run mentorship programs through research, through technology, and through ongoing studies like the one we'll be sharing today. Great. So let's start out with a poll. We'd love to get everyone thinking here and just thinking about next year. I know we're just wrapping up this year, but we'd love to know, what is your primary concern as we move into the next academic year and wrap up this year? And now there's going to be many, I'm sure, but what is the one that stands out the most? Student well-being, student belonging, getting students to complete, administrative capacity on your team. But, and I'm sure there's quite a few things we could put into other. So as we look at the results here, we're getting a lot of retention persistence, which is appropriate because that's what we're going to be focused on today, but also belonging and student mental and physical well-being. So this is a good segue to Tom's program. These are the 3 things that we were trying to design for and why our conversation started. So with that, we'd love to kick it over to Tom to give us a little bit of a lay of the land of UC Riverside. I think you might be on mute, Tom.
Thank you, Joe. Sorry, I was also trying to get the poll off my screen. So UC Riverside, for those who are not aware, we're in the Inland Empire area of Southern California, which is about 35 to 45 miles east of Los Angeles. We are a member of the University of California. We enroll 26,000 students. We're a heavily diverse institution. Our underrepresented minority students is at least 57%. First gen, 56%. We have 51% Pell recipients. We're considered #1 in the country for social mobility for the last 3 years, and are considered one of the most affordable colleges in America. Go ahead and go on to our next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about what did we do, and then what have we looked at in terms of our data around the program so far. So essentially, we launched Mentor Collective in the emergency remote instruction shift of that little pandemic thing. So we shifted to emergency remote instruction, and we really were finding ourselves at a loss of finding a good method for collecting student feedback about how they were doing. And seeing what was going on with students. So we implemented a variety of short-term measures that were immediate. So we did some wellness phone calls, calling campaign. We structured first-gen Zoom chats. I was hosting like 8 and 9 p.m. Zoom chats with first-gen students because that was a time where most students were available. We also had launched a nearly defunct chatbot that was almost done, but not quite there. All of these things were methods to help get a sense of where students were at. As we were progressing through March, keep in mind we're on a quarter system. And so as we're progressing into the end of our spring term, we're really started to look at, all right, if the pandemic is continuing, what are we doing for next year to help build a sense of community, especially about those students who are going to be first-year freshmen and first-year transfer students who are going to be not stepping foot physically on your campus. How do you help build a sense of community? How do you help build a sense of belonging in that remote environment? Our campus had maybe 3% of courses online prior, no fully online degrees. So how do you help support students in this environment when the institution did not have a long-term intent of offering online degree programs? And really for me, I was trying to find ways to help build authentic relationships with students, to find ways to replicate what I would call hallway conversations, that exchange of campus capital that knowledge capital exchange that occurs with students, especially in the hallways as soon as you leave a class, after class, in between classes. How do you do that when students are hitting leave the moment a Zoom session is ending? There was not that chance to build those connections. So we launched Mentor Collective, and we truly moved forward. Oh, can you go back?
Yep.
So we really were looking at that first year, finding a way to ease back to, finding a way to build those connections. As we move forward into fall 21, we returned to in-person. We were trying to find a way to ease back to the in-person, continue to reduce some of that social anxiety and continue to ramp up students' use of campus resources, especially those that they had never seen physically in person. And we really were trying to push forward now into an environment where we're trying to dig deeper into the data, see where we can use it more strategically, more creatively, and to see what are the outcomes. So we can go ahead and move forward. So right off the bat, we were looking for reasons for collaboration, finding ways to help students connect, to exchange that information and that campus capital. Go ahead and progress. And so one of the things that we did was, first, before we even launched, we explored what was going on, what did we have available to help students build a sense of community. We were looking at our 26 different peer mentoring programs that we found across campus, all with various methods for training, with different populations that they were trying to serve. They all had different scopes. They were all very extensively training heavy, but they were also existing structures. So that was something we could look at for maybe scaling. We also looked at what does it look like to build our own mentoring program where we hire a bunch of students to serve as mentors and be able to facilitate something there. That was a high cost scenario. Mentor training time seemed to be extensively high, lots of unknowns, but we could design it to fit specific needs. We also looked at things like Zoom chat rooms and Slack and Discord, and ultimately we ran into issues of IT integration, timing, facilitation, staff time, Zoom fatigue, computer fatigue. Students did not want to be connecting that way. And ultimately, we looked at Mentor Collective. Yes, there was a procurement cost with purchasing an outside vendor, but it was easy to implement. There was low staff load, quick training for mentors. It was easy to scale, and the students were already heavily using text message, and we can get just-in-time responses back to students from their mentors. So as we progress, we really dove in deep on the text messaging peer mentoring. Next slide.
So yeah, for us visual learners, I wanted to map out what Tom is talking about. Tom, can you walk us through the population you were trying to impact, what outcomes you were searching for, and then how that led you to think about, okay, who should mentors be?
Sure. So we're truly trying to go after the freshmen, first year freshmen, and we were trying to look at our first year transfer students. We were trying to also bring added benefit to our heavy first gen population to be able to get them connected with as many campus resources as possible.
Great. And so that led us to, if you're focused on retention, if you're focused on belonging, obviously a leading indicator for retention, it sounds like you wanted someone they could be vulnerable to. And then that led you to think about, okay, how are we going to match folks? I know you all took a little bit more control over this than some programs. You wanted to make sure that the first order was really looking at race, ethnicity, experience, language. And then after that, college, what are we studying? Where are we headed in life? A career program might reverse that. They might say the most important thing is field of study. What we were trying to do, especially in the pandemic, it was just give them that first friend or hallway conversation. Is that right?
Yeah, so I would say for us, our first and foremost benefit was the method you already use, which is letting mentees identify what they want in a mentor first and foremost, and then matching first among that component, that mentee choice component being the best reason to have an authentic relationship with somebody else. Let them identify what that reason is and pair them based on that relationship. And then after that, we would dive into additional ways of connecting based on language, race and ethnicity factors, experiences, hobbies, life experiences. And then really after that, we were looking at college and major and academic interests and career interests.
Right. Excellent. And for those of you who run a program internally or have ran programs before, a lot of times there's a lengthy application for mentors and mentees. Sometimes that can make it feel like a job. And so you're not always getting the folks who maybe don't have time for another full commitment, as Tom was talking about before. Tom, can you just kind of walk us through the general process of what happened when we get into each one of these?
Yeah, so really it starts off with trying to recruit mentors. And so you're ultimately doing what's on the top of that map right there, which is the recruitment of mentors. Mentor Collective works with us very, very interactively to basically conduct outreach. We pulled lists of all of our students' email addresses and cell phone numbers, and we sent out text messages. We also sent out a series of emails from our personnel trying to recruit students to become mentors for our incoming students, our freshmen and our transfers. Then Mentor Collective provides a online training to cover the fundamentals of how to do that. All of our mentors are volunteer. They're all opt-in and they're all volunteer mentors. After we have them and we have a critical mass of those mentors, which really only takes about a few weeks, we then reach out to our mentees, and we do the same method with text messaging as well as emailing, and we get them connected, and then we start the matching process. Mentor Collective conducts the matching process, and then again provides that training, provides some of the guides, and then provides check-in. Some folks are asking about mentor-to-mentee ratios. Mentor Collective will work with you actively on that to be able to identify what your ratios would be, but they also do reach out to students and ask them, do they feel comfortable with adding on more if maybe you've reached a point where you need some more mentors to take on a little bit more. But it's based off of what a mentor, first and foremost, thinks they can handle. But we typically want to see our mentors be somewhere between, Rory's putting in there, about 3 to 5 on average. We would say as many as 7, but probably not more than that. We don't want to overload them, even though these are small, quick interactions. We don't want to overload them, but at the same time, we also don't want them to ignore it or forget about it. So if you only have 1 or 2, it's easy to forget that you're even doing it. Whereas if you have, say, 3 to 5, it gives you just enough critical mass to kind of keep it salient.
Yeah. And one more point on that, in studying ratios in the 300 programs that we help run at Mentor Collective, we found that if a student has at least 2 or 3 mentees, their satisfaction level is much higher than if they only have 1. If you only have 1 mentee, it is a more intimate relationship. However, if that 1 mentee is not responsive, you're now kind of soured on the experience as a mentor. So we want to hedge our bets by giving them the option to have 2 or 3. In that matching survey that Tom was describing, the mentor can select how many they feel they have time for. So there's an education on how much time per mentee should be spent, which can be adjusted to the goals of the program, as well as the expectations of should they be meeting once a month or once a week. This program, Tom, I believe our baseline is once a month, but as we'll get into, we're seeing a lot more interaction than that.
Yeah. So with that, we can say that essentially what happens is the mentor gets the essentially an anonymized text message number to send a text message to their mentee. Again, they're not downloading an app or anything like that. They're just sending them a text message. So that's where we get to the next screen. And you can actually see on the right-hand side, this is an actual welcome check-in from one of our mentors to one of their mentees, both of whom agreed to share their quick chat with us. The nice part is essentially the content of those messages, other than the one that they've shared with us here, is private. We don't see what they're writing to each other. That is absolutely private. But we do get to see data on the frequency of the text messages exchanged. And then the mentors and mentees can do reports back on what is the nature of their conversations, like what are the things that they're talking about thematically. They can also submit insight flags, and these are flags where a mentor will alert us to some sort of significant issue that their mentee is facing, where they may need a referral back to a campus resource that the mentor couldn't refer them to or didn't have a resource for. Mentor Collective will also use the same text messaging to send out a start, mid, and end of academic year survey to help track student sense of belonging. And we've been able to see some results on that and have been able to track that impact as well. And we'll go ahead and go to the next slide.
Great. So it sounds like, Tom, texting was important to you, especially in a pandemic, trying to recreate those hallway conversations when you don't have a hallway. Also, the trackability of it. That's something that we all agreed upon that you don't usually have in a mentor program. But since we're lucky enough to have a student with us today, I want to grab Karina's perspective. How are you talking with your mentor? Are you texting, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so we are first generation students, and also not only that, we're Gen Z. So texting, we live with our phone in our hand. And it was just so easy for my mentees to connect with me because they would just send me a quick text like, hey, Karina, like today I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. Can you help me with X, Y, and Z? And it was just so easy for them to just text me that because I'm on my phone and they're on their phone. Whereas if you're trying to set up a Zoom meeting or send an email, there's a lot of planning that goes into that. It's like, okay, we're going to plan at this time, or I'm not checking my email all the time, but when you text someone, it's fast and it's instant. And for someone who's a part of the Generation Z, like it's just so convenient for us. And I have 8 mentees, 4 from the freshman, the first year collective, and then the transfer collective, I have another 4. So in total, I have 8 mentees, and all of them choose to text me because it's just very convenient for all of us.
Yeah. Thank you for that perspective. I also wanted to add that we do have programs where folks choose not to text. You can meet however you want. So you can meet in person, face-to-face, Zoom, Discord, however you want to talk. This program is aiming to be platform agnostic. However, everything that Tom was talking about, logging the conversation, having discussion guides, having us nudge them, sending out surveys, that can all be done either through text, email, and also the platform that students can log into. So with that, Tom, I would love to hear from you. What do the numbers look like?
Yeah, let's go ahead and advance into that. So for our first year, which was 2020 to 2021, we were able to match over 1,500 freshmen. So that was 31% of our freshman class. We were able to match 30% of our transfer students. And then of our continuing student population that volunteered to be mentors, that was 6% of our student population. For this year too, we would have been able to increase that engagement. We actually launched it a month earlier. So basically right after orientation, but a full month before students would arrive. We have now matched 50% of our freshmen. So that's over 3,000 students, and over 1,000 of our transfer students. That's 44% of those students. And as we progress forward on the data, you can see in the next slide that in the first year, they've exchanged over 56,000 text messages. That was over 22 text messages per pair. And that this year, we're at 87,000 text messages exchanged, and we still have another month left, again, quarter system. So they're at 21 texts per pair. In terms of them reporting back on conversation, they're actually reporting more conversations this year than they did last year. But we've had fewer insight flags. So there's been fewer serious issues brought to our attention from this population this year.
Great. And that is a trend we are seeing across the board. Last year, there was a record number of flags of people asking, are we coming back to campus? How do I register for classes? Resources weren't right in front of them. So there was a lot of things being flagged. We've also kind of adapted our flagging models where a mentor can select, this is a high priority flag. So that's the number that you're seeing here in terms of it actually wanting to go to an advisor, mental health, to a tutor, things like that.
Definitely. So as we progress forward, look at some of the data. So those insight flags, these are those just-in-time supports. These are alerts that are sent from the mentors to our staff, indicating the mentee has needs and concerns. You can see thematically, this is what they typically have asked us about. We got really nervous the first time we saw our transferring schools number. We immediately were like, oh no, what's happening with our students? Why are they wanting to leave? And we realized that the great majority of those were simply they wanted to change major. So it helped to be able to see the context and to get a little bit more information on that. But literally the first one that I received, our insight flag, was this message over here that a student had a financial aid concern. And we were able to see that concern pop in. We were able to quickly connect the mentor with a resource. So that got referred back to the student from the mentor to keep that relationship built up. But we also forwarded that concern to a financial aid representative. They were actually able to call that student within about 5 minutes of sending that alert. And they actually called that student that afternoon. They fixed a financial aid problem, and that kept the student here. That student was getting ready to leave our campus entirely because they didn't know how to connect with our financial aid office. They were able to get that connection, and they were able to build that relationship, and they were ultimately able to be able to stay here. And in fact, I even checked recently, and this student is still progressing as successfully as a sophomore now. So
it's an amazing story, and not something we always think of when we think of mentorship. Usually you pair people up, they go off and talk. It's great to see the students actually be connected through resources and a chance to actually learn about your students. And to that end, Tom, I think this is the first person I've ever seen do this. You synced up your flag data with your academic year. Can you walk us through the thought behind that?
Yeah, so what we did is we were trying to map out what was occurring with our mentees, and we were trying to identify what was occurring and when was it occurring, because ultimately we wanted this richness of data to be able to craft our program for this year as well as for next year on when are students having these issues and when are these issues impacting students. And so you can see some of these items below, the different color codes. Other is a grouping of multiple items, which is why it's so predominant, but they almost all follow about the same pattern. And so what we're using this for is to be able to craft nudging campaigns where we're going to be able to send flash text messages out to students to remind them of specific supports and specific resources throughout the year.
Amazing. So that's a look at flags. Next, let's look at conversations and what folks have been talking about.
Absolutely. So somebody else had put in the chat asking about, what do we get to see in terms of their themes and what are they talking about? The data dashboards that are provided from Mentor Collective help you filter this. They help you look at the insight flag content. They help you look at the conversation topics. These conversation topics help us be able to see during either across time or during a specific time chunk, what conversations are students having at this time of year? How much is this issue or topic relevant during this time of year? And we are able to then use that information to figure out, is there a just-in-time support that we need to get out to students? Or do we need to think more holistically about what services we're offering at what time of year for our students? So this was very helpful, especially during the pandemic when there wasn't a lot of feedback mechanisms in place for students to be able to tell us what was going on with them during that time period. This definitely helps us long-term get feedback back to our administration and to our different offices to be able to figure out the right times and the right moments to be able to have those interventions and those supports outreach for students.
Right. And it looks like the green line at the bottom, that's other. Not surprisingly, academics is a top issue, and that can mean a lot of different things, but we'd love to bring in Karina, who I'm sure has logged a number of conversations having 8 mentees. What are some of the other things you've talked about that maybe don't fit neatly into one of these boxes?
Well, so we mostly talk about what was listed, but for me, I like to build a relationship with my mentees, like any friendship or any relationship in life. And so the first few conversations are just us getting to know each other, what our hobbies, interests, to build that connection. Then after that, I usually like to give my mentees like 5 tips that I use and implement in my life that I've learned over the course of being in college, which are planning, active learning, self-care, getting involved, and time management. So when you come to campus, it's not like you were in high school. You go to school at 8, you come back at 3, and your whole schedule is laid out for you. You have to register for classes. You have to know where your classes are. You have to know who to contact if you can't get into a class. So there's like a lot that goes into it. So I like to show my mentees Google Calendar, because that's something I learned. And I was like, okay, so you plan out your Google Calendar, then on a Sunday night, take your planner and figure out, okay, next week, what do I have? What assignments will I have? Because usually your professors will tell you the week prior. So you write down, okay, I'm going to get these chapters done on Monday, these chapters done on Wednesday. So that way you have time for school, but then also have time for life. Because I think sometimes we forget, like, we are students. So I heavily encourage that when it comes to my mentees. And then they usually talk to me about academics. They're like, Karina, how does our degree audit work? This looks confusing to me and overwhelming. I was like, okay, let's walk through that together. And also financial aid is a big one. So a lot of people are like, we don't know how much we have to pay. How much money we're given and stuff like that. So on our web, we have our financial aid portal where you can see the amount of money we're getting through like FAFSA grants, and then how much is out of pocket. But I know that because of me sitting on our web for 2 hours trying to figure out what is it even telling me. So because of that, I could tell my mentees, I'm like, okay, so this is what you're looking at essentially. And is there any other questions that I can help you with? So yeah, that's practically like how what our conversations are about.
Amazing. I'm sure everyone on this call is starting to think, wow, if that's what folks are talking about, I'm sure there's a treasure trove of data that you don't normally get access to in terms of what are students going through. Tom, I believe you did a thematic analysis of both conversations and flags. What are some of the things that you found when you looked at keywords that came up in some of the flags?
I don't know that I did any keyword tracking.
Yeah. Okay. Didn't you kind of look through flags and also try to see, are people putting time into picking a major? Or didn't give you a little bit of insight into how majors are chosen and when in the student journey? Got it.
Okay. So definitely that was the point where I was missing on the connection of the question there. Yes. So we did look at all of what the messages that they were submitting. We were looking at the messages that were coming across as both the conversations as well as the insight flags. And a lot of those insight flags, like I said, were coming up on either others, which were often advising issues or, account holds or things like that where a student was struggling, as well as we were also seeing issues around academic struggles where, they were having trouble studying or worried about time management. And we were specifically crafting messages to be able to go out to those students. Lisa did a phenomenal job of crafting a mentor advice center on our website where all of the major questions and things that would come up, like they often would click that button of transferring schools, even though they were just looking to change their major. We were able to pull that data, find out what those issues were, and be able to connect students to the right resources, and build out questions to help our mentors do better answers.
Excellent. Well, great. With that, we'd love to dig into some of the outcomes that you saw. Now that we've looked at the conversations and some of the qualitative experiences, we'd love to see what you saw in the numbers in terms of what happened in the 2 years. Yeah.
So ultimately, we want to make sure that this had value, that there was an impact on retention, that there was impact on other metrics. We wanted to see that this was giving us a return on our investment. Ultimately, what we found for that first year program for our freshmen, we did see a 1.3% higher retention rate of the students who were participating versus those who were not participating in the program. Again, when they moved on from winter to the spring term, that was 1.4% higher. And returning from spring to the next year in fall, it was a 2.1% higher rate for those that were mentored versus those that were not. And if you look at our transfer students on the next slide, you can see those numbers were even more pronounced. It was a 4.1 term to term percent retention increase and a 5% spring to the next fall retention increase. We did add transfer students in winter that year, so that's why there's no winter retention data. So we did see more pronounced outcomes. And if you go to the next slide, you can see we also were trying to track it based on other common metrics. Credits earned, credits attempted, GPA for the term, GPA for cumulative. And you'll see mostly trending in the positive across all of these components. I think our transfer spring numbers and fall numbers were maybe not higher for the campus collective participants. But ultimately, overall, we saw positive trends for those participating. And we really wanted to dig in even deeper than that to see, is this just, self-selection bias or anything along that line? So we've been digging in deeper, looking at, does level of engagement make a difference? And do we need to nudge some students towards more engagement, hoping that will produce more results? So what we've been doing was looking at the data. So you can see the first 4 columns on the left-hand side of each section are the amount of interactions from 1 to 2 all the way up to 10 based on their conversations reported. And those that reported more conversations ultimately had higher outcomes. Those that were not mentored traditionally had lower retention for the next year. And you can see the same thing in our transfer student population, which is the next slide. Again, at an even more pronounced rate. So even those that had the most minimal interactions in this, 1 or 2, had higher rates than those who had no interaction and were not mentored with the program. So we're continuing to look at this and trying to identify, is this trend continuing for this year? We're also pushing forward, trying to look at data about sense of belonging, as well as other components, which I think we are going to dive into next.
All right. Before we do, I just wanted to point out the yellow line, 10 or more conversations. The fact that we have so many folks reporting 10 or more conversations is not normal. And a lot of programs, if you've ran a program, unless it's infused in a class and logging a conversation is part of the grade, you're not going to see that many. So it's just really encouraging to see folks logging 10 or more conversations.
And that's a good point to point out too, that these are based on self-reported conversations from the mentor to the mentees. So this is based on self-report. This is not the number of text messages exchanged. So that's another component that we're looking at in the terms of the data for last year, but we'll also be pulling that data for this year once this year is completed, looking at the number of text messages exchanged and if that retention rates are also following this trend. So as we move forward, we'll look at sense of belonging data. So I mentioned those pre, mid, and end of program surveys that go out. And there's a couple of key components that go into those surveys. So on a standard, Likert scale, 1 to 5, with 1 being low and 5 being high, I feel like an important member of my school community. I feel supported at my school. I feel comfortable at my school. We were seeing net change from beginning of the program to the end of the program, positive net change for all of our students that were participating from mentees, both our freshmen as well as our transfers. Now this year, you'll notice that there's an even stronger change if you're only looking at the pre to mid. So far, we only have pre to mid, we don't have end, but the change rate is significantly higher, especially for I feel comfortable at my school. It's significantly higher than what the change rate was for the pre to mid for last year. So we're already seeing some positive results, and we're hoping that the end results will either be the same or be higher than last year's.
Excellent. I just had someone message me saying, have you ever done that survey for non-participants? Tom, I think this is that you had. Can you tell us about your future plans for that?
Yes, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. So one of the things that we're specifically looking at is trying to get that comparator data. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing for this year is doing an end year survey out to all of those who did not participate in the mentoring program and trying to collect the data on those students to see what their end of program reports back were. Now, that being said too, we also had pretty robust response rates. We don't have it listed on these slides, but we're talking about usually in the vicinity of 19% response rates for our freshmen. And I think it was something in the vicinity of I want to say about 34% response rate for our transfer students. So we had pretty good response rates for those surveys in terms of this data.
Excellent. This is great to see. A lot of times people ask me, how do you measure belonging? So it's good to see a tool that's being used repeatedly year after year, and then you kind of pushing the boundaries in terms of expanding to non-participants. What have you heard from mentees and mentors that stood out to you, Tom?
Definitely. So this is one part we always insist on including, is making sure that we're including the narrative data as well as the actual statistics and numbers, because we want our students to be able to share their life experiences, to share the impacts that this has had on a personal level. And these were some of the quotes that we see, a lot of these exact same quotes. Mentees were letting us know that their mentors were helping them find life and work balance, life and school balance, that they were helping them answer questions and adjust to remote learning, find ways to connect to professors during office hours, find ways to help them get scheduled. They were teaching their peers how to develop study plans and how to make different connections with campus resources. But ultimately, they were helping with the transition from either community college and the university, or between high school and the college experience. And then in terms of our mentors, which I think is our next slide, we were also seeing that it was making them feel like they were making an impact, that it was building a sense of community for them. It strengthened their relationship with the university and with the school. But my personal favorite was that it made them realize that they hadn't taken full advantage of the resources fully available to them. It helped them realize that there was even more resources available and that they should be taking advantage of those resources as quickly as possible. And we definitely wanted to see that component come through.
Excellent. Yeah, this is another trend we are seeing, especially post-COVID. Folks just saying, I wasn't aware of a tutoring center on campus. So being a mentor helped me learn about resources, helped me learn and grow as well. So it shouldn't just be about the mentee. It should be about the mentor growing as well, whether that mentor is a student or an alum. And I know one of the questions in the chat was, do you see similar results in your alumni career programs? The answer to that is yes. We have separate conversations that really explore that data, but we see folks using the chat just as much, logging conversations. They can also choose to communicate outside of the chat. But to that question, yes, we do see alumni interacting at the same levels. So with this last slide, I really wanted to get Karina's closing thoughts. What would you want to leave with everyone gathered here today in terms of what you've experienced and what they should know?
I think an important thing here is that data is super important, but at the end of the day, behind every one of those numbers, there's a person. And with us being a student, we not only have to balance school and personal life. I have a school work life balance that I have going on here. At one point, a few months ago, my dad had a stroke. I had 3 jobs and I was putting myself through school. So it's so I really love being a mentor because I have to remind my mentees that you are a person. It's okay. School is, I value my education so much, but I was at the end of the day, you have to put your well-being first before you can do anything else. And I think sometimes as students, we forget that we are human and that we need to take time for ourselves to take care of ourselves. And that's why I'm so big on time management, so you can balance school, work, and life. So, yes.
Valuable a lesson and experience. Thank you, Karina, for balancing all that has been put on your plate. It's an amazing thing to hear firsthand. I want to ask Tom and Lisa, if you want to chat in, what's next? You talked about some studies you have cooking coming up, but where do you see this going from here?
Yeah, so the first year we launched it basically week 1. The second year we launched it a month before school started, before the fall term. And this year we're talking about launching it sometime in summer, probably pre-orientation. We are going to start seeing this as being something we'll try to use as part of our yield efforts. This is absolutely also going to be something that we'll be using to try to help engage students more constructively, more strategically throughout the year. I also supervise our academic resource center. So we'll be working with our academic resource center to send out just-in-time nudges based on that thematic data that we've collected. But we're also partnering with our student affairs partners to try to also send out some messages during different points and times of the year to help nudge students towards getting involved and to other health-related, mental health-related, and other campus wellness resources, as well as some of our basic needs components. I also want to make sure that we highlight the fact that, for us, it's all about students building relationships with students and sharing that campus capital knowledge. I work a lot with our first gen programs, and we really want to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to help our students acclimate to the university environment, to help feel like they have a sense of belonging here, a sense of community here. They have resources that they're utilizing. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you to all of our mentors who give up of their time to be able to help support their peers. Our student population is very, very engaged when they want to work there with the local community. And so we're really thankful that we have all of these wonderful volunteers. We would not be able to operate a program like this without these student populations. That also said, we're going to keep working on trying to find some in-person engagement opportunities for them for this next year to try to do some group activities. We had planned one, and unfortunately, then this thing called Omicron hit, and we went back to emergency remote for a month, and that was when we were trying to do some of our in-person activities. So for next year, we'll be aiming for some structured engagement and going from there.
Well, thank you. And I put up a graphic that you created, Tom, an image of all your mentors brought together so we can see what Karina was talking about, that these just aren't numbers. These are people with diverse challenges and goals and feelings that change every day. And so we want to always keep that in mind when looking at the data as well. With that, I want to thank everyone and also just get your thoughts if it would be helpful to keep this conversation going. If you want to learn more about mentorship and scaling mentorship at your institution, let us know. In addition to sending you these slides and the recording, we can line up a chat to dig more into your specific population and your institution and how this might look differently for an approach for you all. So please let us know if you'd like to learn more. And to that end, we also have an upcoming conversation on transfer students, and that's coming up very soon here on May 12th. So please register for that. You can go to our website, or you should receive an invite. Love to have you rejoin that conversation to really dig into specifically about transfers. If there are any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I think we've done a good job of answering them along the way, but I just wanted to say thank you so much to our wonderful panel, to Karina for taking the time to educate us on your perspective and what a mentor does and what you experience. Thank you, Tom, for 2 years of data, for revisiting this topic, and for pushing all of us to think about mentorship differently and to think about the research differently.
Happy to participate, happy to help expand knowledge about the great works that our students have been doing with this program.
Wonderful. We have time for one quick question. How do you keep participants engaged in your program?
That's a great question. Honestly, this is peer-to-peer, so they're keeping each other engaged. They're building a relationship, an authentic relationship, the same way that they would normally build relationships with peers. So we don't often have any struggles with keeping them engaged and keeping them in contact. That said, Mentor Collective does have some automated mechanisms that will help nudge mentors and saying, you haven't had an interaction with your mentee for X amount of time. Try to connect with them. It's worded much more eloquently than the way I just described it, but again, it's a nice little nudge reminder to make sure that you're connecting with your mentees.
Yeah. And Lisa and Tom's team can go into their dashboard. The dashboard has been revamped recently, but they can filter by who has not logged a conversation. So again, this is self-reported, but we want to see at least who has not even had a conversation. We can also see who's not had a text. We can then target that population and see if they are still interested in this, or if they're having troubles connecting with their mentor or mentee. So that's made engagement and nudging folks along a lot easier as well. So great. I think we're right at time. I want to thank everyone. Let's keep this conversation going past today. Looking forward to having you all on the next conversation for transfer students, and then following up with each of you as well. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day, everyone.